Now then everybody, and thanks for joining me this week where I reflect on the past 8 months of owning the Panasonic S1, which is what I'm using to film the video this evening. But don't worry, I've got some footage to play over the top of me talking about the camera in question. So in this video I'm going to talk about some of the things that I really like about the camera and some of the things which I don't really like about the camera. So I bought the camera now in September 2019 and it's now May of 2020, and 2 of the months we've spent in lockdown. However, before lockdown I did get a chance to play with the camera quite a lot, and I sort of feel now that I know what I'm going to say about it. So let's get started with the things which I really like about this camera. First things first, I'm going to start off with the size and weight. Now it's not for everybody, but I really like the fact this is a large, heavy camera. I like to do a lot of handheld footage shots, and the fact that this camera is a substantial weight really means that I have to lock my elbows in and really think about my movement to try to get shots which aren't too unstable, that can be either fixed in post or don't require a gimbal. Now that does lead me on to the next thing, which is the fact this is a full frame camera with an image stabilized sensor. So on top of that handheld steadiness, as much as I can get it, the fact that the sensor does have that stabilization really kind of helps, and was one of the big things for me when thinking of buying this camera. And I'm happy to say that that stabilization, just like it was in the GH5, is as good or very close to as good for this full frame camera. So I've sort of gone over 2 things really quickly there. The next thing about this camera which I really love is the colours that come from it and the image quality that you get from it. Now I was accustomed to 10-bit 422 in the GH5, which I owned before the S1, and at first the S1 didn't have 422 10-bit straight out of the box, and that's another reason why it took me until around September before I did make the leap to buy the camera. But the fact that it now has internal 422 10-bit at both 1080p and 4K, but not in 4K 60, means that this camera has some fantastic potential. And the footage that you're going to see this evening on this video is all 4K 10-bit 422 video. So you'll be able to see how it's been graded and the quality that can come out of this camera. The next thing I really like about the camera is the customizational buttons. Again, something I was accustomed to from the GH5, but the S1 I feel has just a few more, and also some really nice dedicated buttons for white balance, ISO and things like that. At the moment I've got the C custom switches on the top of the camera set to be able to switch between 4K, 1080p and also different frame rates as well. All these so far are really sort of the way that I use this camera, mainly for video purposes. Now it wasn't ever built to be a video centric camera, and that's why the S1H exists, but for me the S1H was too far out of my budget, and I find the things which I use the most in the GH5 are actually still present in this S1, which is why I always talk about it from a video perspective. But if you are wondering why I didn't go for the S1H, it was purely because of the cost differences. So now let's talk about some of the things which for me are the biggest issues with this camera. And I'm going to start straight away with the media capture ports of this camera. So it does have one SD card port, and it also has the XQD card ports. For me, I wish it either had 2 XQD or 2 SD cards. The fact it's one and the other means that it's an extra thing that I have to purchase. An XQD is expensive. But for me it's just a bit of a fart around trying to have 2 different data cards when ultimately I only actually have SD cards, and I still haven't got around to buying an XQD card for the camera. So for me that's still something, when I see it I always wish that it had another SD card port. The next negative for me is the autofocus. So I've done a couple of videos already on the Sigma 50mm autofocus with the S1, and for me it's still not as reliable as I'd like it to be. Saying that though, this evening I am recording completely in autofocus continuous, so I hope I am in focus. But ultimately the AF still isn't quite there yet for me, and it's not a deal breaker because I use manual focus a lot of the time when I'm behind the camera, but it is still a bit of an issue, especially if it's, you know, if I'm doing some gimbal work with the camera and I need to get the subject, I'm tracking the subject and I need it in focus. The next negative is the thing that is probably talked about the most, and that's the lack of a flippy screen. Now it does have a screen that can come out and tilt up, tilt down, and it does tilt to the left slightly, the left, maybe the right should I say. However, the fact that it doesn't have a flippy screen for me coming from the GH5, I still every so often go for it, and then I have to remember that I don't have the ability to flip the screen to the sides. So again, not much of a deal breaker. I do spend most of my time behind the camera, and when it's situations like this, I find I just use the Lumix Pro app and monitor it through that. So I do have workarounds for it, but it is a shame that's not included. The last thing which I'm going to talk about, which is again both a positive and a negative, is the battery life. Now, it's a good battery for the size of camera and the capacity. However, I do wish it lasted a little bit more, or I do wish it was a little bit more consistent. So sometimes I can be on around 25% and it will drop rather rapidly to that 7% mark, which can be a little bit anxiety inducing, shall we say. On the flip side, it does last a lot longer, between 100% and 50%, and this could just be an issue that I've got that's isolated with this battery that I'm using. As a workaround, what I tend to do is attach a external battery through the USB-C on the side, which is actually another feature which is really good about the camera, that you can run external batteries and charge it on the fly as well without having to take the battery out completely. So that in a nutshell are some of the pros and some of the cons that I've found about the camera. Overall, I'm loving the experience of having a full frame camera, and dare I say a full frame GH5. I know that could get some negative comments down below, but I don't mean it as in something that could replace the GH5. All I mean is the things I use the most from the GH5 I can still use on the S1. Not all of them, but the ones that I personally use. That may be different for you. So hopefully you found this reflection of the S1 over the past eight months useful to you. Please feel free to ask me any questions about the camera in the comment section below, and as always, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in our future videos. Thank you all very much.